At the break of dawn, the courtyard of the imperial palace was already stirring. Lanterns flickered in narrow halls, casting long shadows upon stone walls carved with calligraphy and Christian crosses now defaced. In hidden chambers beyond the velvet curtains, women once heirs of faith and lineage were being summoned, their names forgotten, their prayers muffled, their destinies reshaped by an empire that claimed all. From the Bosporus to the highlands of Armenia, rumors had spread. Christian women from conquered lands were being taken into the court, stripped of their silk, taught new tongues, forced into new rituals. Some whispered of families torn apart, sisters disappearing into the Sultan's inner world, never to be seen again. Others spoke of public parades where captive women knelt before imams and recited verses in a tongue that was not their own. All agreed on one detail: the costs paid by their bodies and souls were beyond imagination. What the Ottoman Empire did to the women who carried Christianity east was not just conquest, it was an erasure layered in ritual, law, and power. And today, we step into corridors where whispers of faith collided with the demands of an empire. As you watch, you may no longer see saints and sinners, but the quiet wrestling of identity under the empire's shadow. Subscribe if you crave more journeys into history's unspoken corners. Behind closed doors, the process began. Imagine a young Christian woman in a mountain village of Trebizond, or a village near Van, waking one dawn to find armed men at her door. She is seized, along with her sister, her cousin, or neighbor. They are told nothing of what awaits. They are marched across valleys, past caravans, to capitals like Constantinople or Edirne. Their clothing is taken, their Christian names erased. In the language of the court, they are given new ones: Fatma, Aisha, Emine. They are introduced to the imperial harem, not as honored consorts at first, but as captives. Many had been taken in the chaos of war. As war captives and non-Muslims, their enslavement was lawful under the Ottoman system. Some would be destined for concubinage, others dispatched to provincial households or assigned as servants to palace chambers. In every case, their Christian identity became the first layer to peel away. They were shown the ways of the mosque before they were shown their new quarters. A devout imam would tutor them in ritual ablutions, the recitation of Al-Fatiha, the meaning of Shahada. Slowly, the rhythms of Christian prayer fell silent. Their languages changed. In some cases, Arabic script replaced the cross on walls. Many accepted this externally, a survival tactic, while keeping prayer inside in secret. One name emerges from the records: Nilüfer Hatun. She had been born Christian, from the Greek world, and was enslaved and converted, given into Sultan Orhan's harem. She rose, bore a son who became Sultan Murad I, and became mother of the empire, the first Valide Hatun. But remember, her story is exceptional. For most, there was no ascent, only erasure. Some women were absorbed into households far from the capital. In eastern Anatolia, Armenian women were deported, married into Muslim households. Their names and faith changed over decades. Some of the Armenians who survived the slaughter later claimed that their women and children had been absorbed, baptized in secret, their heritage severed. Elsewhere, Christian girls captured in Balkan raids were sent to Istanbul's slave bazaars. There, buyers would inspect them: youth, health, sleep in their eyes, the firmness of muscle. Some were purchased by officials or chiefs. Many ended in the harem, unseen, unheard. Once there, their new daily life became a ritual of acclamation. They learned Turkish, the rules of haremlik and selamlik, how to serve, how to anticipate. In time, some gained small influence, though only by renouncing their Christian past. Conversion was complicated. In theory, Islam did not permit forced conversion, yet in practice, power made it scriptable. Christian women entering the court were pressured to convert, often privately, often gradually. Some did so under duress, others for survival, still others out of chance alliances. But their lives changed irreversibly. Many Christian nobles had advocated for their women to retain faith, especially in borderlands. Yet Ottoman law understood conversion as a one-way street. Muslims leaving Islam, apostasy, was punishable by death. Christians converting to Islam was celebrated. Over time, Christian women could be safe from being forced back, but their path back was often barred by family, by isolation, by social power. One dramatic case, in 1852, a Bosnian Christian girl named Mara Ilic was caught in a legal tangle. She had been taken into Anatolia with a pasha's household, pleaded to return, and was claimed by her brother to have been enslaved and forced to convert. Austrian authorities intervened. The Ottoman state claimed she had converted voluntarily. The dispute echoed across empires, a single girl's faith given to politics. Even in more recent centuries, incidents like the Salonika incident in 1876 showed how volatile conversion was. A teenage Bulgarian Christian woman in Salonika asked to be recognized as Muslim. A mob, diplomatic collisions, bodies left in streets. Her fate became entangled in empire, religion, and the struggle between public will and private belief. Inside the palace, some Christian-born women achieved strange duality. They became patrons to mosques, endower of Waqf institutions, builders of baths and soup kitchens, even while once bearing Christian names and memories. Yet the Christian liturgy that once shaped their bones was shrouded. We see in Esperanza Malchi, a Jewish woman converted to Islam, navigating court politics, influencing the Sublime Porte, not uncommon. The harem's power lay not just in bodies, but in whispers, alliances, and secret lines of influence. The same ring could apply to Christian women who adapted and survived inside. But for many, survival meant silence, hidden crosses, whispered prayers at night, moving, lapsing shadows of faith behind the domes. Some passed their children Christian in secret, others lost every thread. The Ottoman system of Devşirme offers a dark mirror. While this system forcibly recruited Christian boys and converted them into Muslim servants and soldiers, some women connected to those families were also touched, indirectly. If the sons were taken, the daughters often remained in villages but under constant pressure to assimilate, to convert, to intermarry. Their Christian communities shrank, consciousness endangered. In Anatolia, by the 17th century, conversion had swept. In some regions, the Christian presence was nearly erased. In such lands, the Christian women were fewer, the rituals less known. Their descendants might not even remember the faith of their grandmothers. One powerful twist: some Christian women, even after conversion, secretly reverted or practiced Christian rites in the margins. But discovery was dangerous. Apostasy could bring execution. The Sultan's reach extended into hidden chambers. At times, the empire used these stories as propaganda to show the civilizing power of Islam, that Christian souls would find their home in the Sultan's realm. But for every story of assimilation, there were tragedies. Women who died refusing to pray, women who took their faith to the grave, writing secret psalms on walls. Anecdote: in a provincial town, a woman refused to wear Islamic garb, saying it would tear her baptismal name from her skin. She was locked away in a small house, visited occasionally by a mufti who urged her to recite the creed. She answered only in an ancient tongue. At dawn weeks later, she was found dead. Her body bore no wounds, only labored breath stopped. The inquest declared natural causes. Locals believed her faith shattered her heart. From the court to the provinces, from noble houses to peasant springs, the Ottoman enterprise upon Christian women ranged from assimilation to annihilation. It was not uniform. Some escaped, some survived, some surrendered, but in every case, the empire reclaimed them: body, name, faith. A few women stood as anomalies. Some Christian noblewomen married into Ottoman elites, sometimes converting, sometimes negotiating their faith. In rare cases, they retained Christian practice discreetly. but evidence is thin, stories whispered in foreign archives and missionary letters. Over centuries, Christian women served as symbols of conquest, of assimilation, of disappearance. Their fate was a battlefield, not of swords, but of names, faith, memory. We can ask, what did empire win by absorbing them? Political loyalty, property claims, legitimacy over diverse lands. But at what cost? Each woman lost was a thread in a community's tapestry. Each conversion was a silence imposed on centuries of liturgy. Each erased name was an echo swallowed. No overt conclusion here. You decide what angle troubles you more. Is it the enforced conversions, the silent erasures, the women who lived in between faiths? Drop in the comments your thought. Which story here shocks you most? The tale of Nilüfer, Mara Illich, or those hidden in rural hills, speaking Christian psalms behind closed doors? At night, the palace fell silent, but the silence carried secrets. In the upper quarters of Topkapi, lamps burned low as the women of the harem whispered in a dozen languages. Greek, Armenian, Georgian, Albanian tongues that should never have touched the same air now mingled behind lattice screens. Each woman carried a story she could never tell aloud. The empire called them odalisks, yet that word flattened everything: love, grief, captivity, the small rebellions that survived behind painted smiles. The Ottomans were not the first empire to draw power through women, but they perfected the art of turning identity into diplomacy. The harem was not a brothel. It was a machine of politics wrapped in perfume and fear. The women who had once brought Christianity east now became instruments of balance, offered, educated, and reshaped to reflect the will of the Sultan. Conversion was rarely a single act. It was a slow unmaking. First came new names, then new clothing, then the small daily prayers whispered before dawn. Over time, even gestures changed. To cross oneself became forbidden. To fold the hands in prayer became second nature. Some resisted quietly. Letters from 16th century European envoys tell of women in the imperial harem who smuggled tiny crucifixes hidden inside hair combs. Others carved secret symbols into the wooden beams of their chambers, marks so small only another believer would notice. A Venetian ambassador wrote of a young Greek concubine who refused to speak during lessons in Arabic. She would answer only in Latin hymns, he wrote, as if each verse were a shield. No one knows what became of her, only that her name Sophia vanished from the court record within a year. The system that swallowed her was vast. Captives from the Mediterranean, the Balkans, and the Caucasus poured into Ottoman markets. Christian girls, prized for their beauty, fetched higher prices. Traders in Istanbul, Cairo, Aleppo, and Bursa competed to deliver the most elegant and obedient. The buyers were pashas, viziers, and governors, but also the households of wealthy merchants and provincial rulers. Inside these homes, conversion followed a quiet choreography, a public bath, a new wardrobe, lessons from the household imam. Some owners believed that converting a slave elevated their own standing before God. For the enslaved, refusal often meant punishment or sale. Acceptance meant survival. Historians later called it a soft conversion, but the softness existed only on paper. To the women living it, the choice between faith and breath was not a choice at all. Centuries later, Western travelers romanticized the harem, painted it as a place of silk and song, women reclining on cushions, laughter echoing through marble halls. But the women inside knew it as something else, a world where their pasts were buried under embroidered veils. Even within this confinement, some rose high. The story of Roxelana, born Alexandra Lisovska, a Ruthenian Christian from modern-day Ukraine, has been polished by centuries of retelling. Captured by Crimean Tatars, sold in the Istanbul slave market, she entered the harem of Sultan Suleiman, the Magnificent. She converted to Islam, took the name Hürrem, and became his legal wife, an unprecedented honor. She bore his heirs, influenced state policy, and built charitable complexes that still stand. Her rise became legend, the slave who became queen. Yet behind the legend lay the truth. that her power rested upon her erasure. Her Christian past had to die for her Islamic identity to live. Others followed similar paths: Mihrimah, Nurbanu, Kusum, all women with roots in Christian lands who ruled behind veils. They sponsored mosques, schools, and soup kitchens, writing themselves into Ottoman history. But their origins were rewritten. In court records, their native villages vanished, replaced by the title of the palace. Outside the walls, the same process unfolded on a smaller scale. In conquered Balkan towns, Christian families often surrendered daughters as part of tribute or to secure protection. Some girls were taken as part of the Devşirme, a levy originally designed for boys, but occasionally extended to include women of exceptional beauty or skill. The practice blurred the boundary between taxation and abduction. Villages prayed that the collectors would pass them by. When they did not, the church bells tolled, not for mass, but for mourning. Those who reached Istanbul faced a strange education. Tutors taught them music, poetry, and languages. The empire demanded refinement. Even captives were molded into ornaments worthy of its grandeur. Some learned to write the elegant Ottoman script, to play the oud, to sing verses of Rumi. A few found brief comfort in art, an echo of the culture they'd lost. One chronicler described a Georgian girl who painted icons in secret, disguising the saints as abstract patterns to avoid suspicion. When her work caught the Sultan's eye, she was rewarded with jewels. He never knew he was admiring the face of the Virgin Mary, hidden beneath swirls of blue and gold. Beyond the capital, Christian women endured different fates. In Anatolia and eastern provinces, conversion campaigns during times of unrest targeted Armenian and Greek communities. During the 17th and 18th centuries, forced marriages to Muslim soldiers became common in frontier regions. Some local officials allowed women to keep their faith. Others imposed Islam as the condition for safety. The result was generations of mixed-identity families, children who spoke Turkish but whispered Christian prayers their mothers had taught them. These children lived between worlds, too Muslim for the church, too Christian for the mosque. They grew up in a silence that history rarely records. Not all stories were tragedies. A handful of Christian women used their new positions to protect others. Court documents mention concubines who petitioned the Sultan for mercy on behalf of Christian prisoners. One, identified only as the Circassian Lady of the Treasury, secured the release of a group of monks accused of espionage. The chronicler added dryly, her devotion was excessive. Perhaps it was the last spark of her old faith flickering through diplomacy. Yet for every woman with influence, hundreds vanished into anonymity. By the 18th century, Istanbul's slave markets had become so large that European visitors described them as a city within a city. They wrote of women displayed behind curtains, buyers inspecting hands and teeth, scribes recording each sale with bureaucratic precision. The ledgers remain, long after the names have faded. The empire's legal codes treated these women as both property and potential converts. A Christian woman could not testify against a Muslim man. Her word carried half the weight in court. If she bore a Muslim child, the child was considered fully Muslim, regardless of her wishes. In that sense, the empire extended itself through the wombs of the conquered. Occasionally, rebellion broke out. In the 19th century, as nationalist movements stirred across the Balkans, stories of abducted women fueled anger against Ottoman rule. Pamphlets circulated describing forced conversions, abductions, and the sale of Christian girls to high officials. Some were exaggerated, others painfully true. The image of the captive Christian woman became a rallying cry for liberation, turning private pain into public outrage. Inside the empire, officials responded with proclamations condemning abuses while quietly maintaining the system that enabled them. The slave trade continued legally until the mid-19th century, when Western pressure forced reforms. Even then, the markets did not close overnight. They simply moved behind closed doors. By the time the empire entered its final century, the old machinery of captivity had changed form but not spirit. In the eastern provinces during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, especially amid the violence against Armenians, women again found themselves at the mercy of soldiers and militias. Many were forced into Muslim households, their identities rewritten. Missionary reports and survivor testimonies describe women tattooed to mark their new belonging, their Christian names forbidden. Some later escaped and told their stories to foreign journalists. Others never resurfaced, their descendants today unaware of their origins. The pattern repeated itself across generations, faith transformed into a tool of empire. A Christian woman taken from her village might rise to luxury or sink into obscurity, but either way, she became part of the Ottoman myth. The empire as melting pot, tolerant yet controlling, merciful yet merciless. In the city markets, storytellers turned these tragedies into tales of romance. They sang of the Pasha's love for the Christian maiden, of forbidden devotion, of conversions born from passion. The crowds loved these stories. They softened the cruelty of reality. A poet even joked that the empire conquered more hearts than lands, an uncomfortable truth wearing a smile. Through it all, the women who had once carried Christianity, East missionaries, nuns, noble daughters, village mothers, became shadows in someone else's chronicle. Their faith moved underground, passed through lullabies, coded gestures, and old songs. One traveler in the 1800s described hearing a lullaby in the hills of Cappadocia that sounded like a church hymn. The singer, an old woman in a Muslim village, claimed it was just an ancient cradle song, but the melody matched a Byzantine chant used during Lent. Even after centuries, the faith had found ways to breathe beneath the surface. By the twilight of the empire, when the Young Turks rose and the old order began to crumble, these hidden histories started to resurface. Records emerged of Christian women pleading for recognition, for the right to return to their faith. Some were granted freedom, many were not. Officially, they no longer existed as Christians. On paper, they were Muslims, wives, mothers, widows of the empire. In spirit, they were something else entirely. The empire that had once stretched from the Danube to the Nile began to contract, but the marks it left on those women did not fade. Long after the palaces emptied and the sultans fell, the descendants of those conversions carried the weight of two faiths in one heart. Their stories are fragments scattered across archives and folklore, faint traces of the women who walked between the cross and the crescent. By the last decades of the empire, the air in Istanbul had changed. The domes still gleamed at sunset, but the confidence that had filled the city's veins for centuries had thinned. Carriages rattled down the old avenues past the markets where women had once been sold. The call to prayer still echoed across the Bosporus, but beneath it, other sounds were returning bells, faint and uncertain, from the churches that had never truly gone silent. Inside old Christian quarters, widows of vanished husbands taught girls to read by candlelight. Their alphabets were mixed now, Greek letters beside Ottoman script, psalms beside fragments of Persian poetry. It was the residue of two worlds colliding. Many of those girls were the granddaughters of women who had entered the empire's heart by force. When the 19th century opened, reformers in the palace spoke of equality, of modern law, of ending the slave markets that had fed the old harem system. Edicts were issued, inspectors appointed, but habits, once woven into the fabric of power, rarely vanish by decree. In the provinces, the trade continued under new names: adoption, guardianship, protection. Missionary records from the American and French schools in Anatolia described Armenian and Greek girls taken into Muslim households after raids. Some escaped and sought refuge at the missions. Others refused to leave, afraid they would be treated as traitors by both sides. She called herself neither Mariam nor Fatma, one missionary wrote. She said her name was Dust. During the wars of the empire's final century, the uprisings in the Balkans, the Crimean campaigns, the massacres in the East, women again became both trophies and witnesses. In 1894, as violence spread through the Armenian provinces, foreign consuls reported mass abductions of Christian women by soldiers and irregulars. Some were married off overnight, others dispersed among tribal groups. Ottoman officials promised investigations, but few results followed. For the women, these weren't statistics, they were the same old story replayed on new stages. A faith that had once traveled east through missionaries and merchants was now being swallowed by the empire that claimed to protect it. In 1915, when the empire convulsed in its final great purge, the pattern reached its darkest point. Columns of Armenian women and children were driven into the Syrian desert. Along the way, Ottoman officers and local militias separated the young women, taking them into their households. Many were forced to convert, to remarry, to forget. Their baptismal names were crossed from records. New Islamic names appeared in census books. Years later, survivors who returned to their villages often found themselves strangers. Some had Muslim husbands, children who spoke Turkish or Kurdish, and no church left to return to. Others kept two names, one for the state, one for the night. "I am Anna," an old survivor told a journalist decades later, "but they called me Aisha." I answered to both, because both of them lived inside me. The empire that had begun by absorbing the daughters of Byzantium ended by scattering the last women of the East across deserts and exile routes. In the ruins of Aleppo and Deir ez-Zor, missionaries found groups of Armenian and Greek women hidden in Muslim households. Some refused rescue, terrified of losing the only shelter they had. Others wept as they recited Christian prayers they barely remembered. It was not all cruelty. There were Muslim families who hid Christian women from soldiers, who refused to enforce forced marriages, who treated them as kin. In letters preserved by the Patriarchate of Constantinople, rescued women wrote, "Thanks to Muslim neighbors who had kept our souls alive." But these moments of mercy were scattered, like candles in wind. By the time the Sultan was dethroned and the empire dissolved, the old world of harems and palace courts was already a relic. The republic that replaced it declared equality of citizens, regardless of faith. Yet in the silence that followed, no one spoke of the women lost in translation between faiths. There were no memorials, no official lists, only absences, the missing branches on family trees, the mothers who never told their children their true names. In the villages along the Black Sea, old women still carried fragments of the past. They crossed themselves secretly when storms rolled in, or whispered fragments of Greek hymns while lighting oil lamps before mirrors. Anthropologists who visited in the 1960s recorded lullabies with traces of Christian liturgy, sung by grandmothers who swore they were Muslim. The melody survived even when the words did not. One could walk through the ruins of monasteries in eastern Anatolia and find graffiti carved by later hands, crescents beside crosses, Arabic beside Armenian, hearts scratched next to initials. They were love letters and survival notes, silent proof that faith, even forced underground, finds its way into the stone. What the empire did to those women cannot be measured only in violence. It reshaped the meaning of belonging. A woman could be born Christian, die Muslim, and carry both within her without contradiction, because survival demanded it. The empire taught them to hide, to bend, to weave two identities into one body. The cost was memory. For the Ottoman rulers, it was policy. For the women, it was life rewritten. Each conversion, each erased name, was a brick in the wall that held the empire together. Their children filled its armies, their sons became governors, their daughters entered new harems. Christianity had once spread east through their ancestors' hands. Now, those same bloodlines served the state that had silenced them. There's a haunting echo in that reversal. The same faith that had once defied empires ended up surviving inside one, whispered by the women it had lost. After the First World War, when diplomats gathered to redraw borders, they argued over land, not souls. No one counted the women who had disappeared into other identities. The archives mention them only indirectly in property disputes, in petitions for inheritance, in census corrections. But if you trace those records carefully, you can still see their shadows. A Christian name crossed out, a new Islamic name written beside it in the same hand. Today, descendants of those women live across Turkey, the Balkans, and the Caucasus. Some discovered their ancestry only recently, grandmothers who confessed on their deathbeds that they had been baptized in secret, families who found crosses buried in garden soil. Others will never know. The empire's greatest success was not just conquest, but the quiet rewriting of identity so complete that memory itself obeyed. Walk through Istanbul now, past the old slave market near the Grand Bazaar, and you can feel the residue of their stories. The walls have been scrubbed clean, the stalls sell rugs and souvenirs, but the stones remember. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman with green eyes or auburn hair might carry the blood of those vanished believers, unaware of the prayers once whispered by her ancestors. History rarely leaves clear lessons, but it leaves traces. The Ottoman Empire's treatment of the women who brought Christianity east was not a single crime but a long choreography of power conversion as policy, love as conquest, identity as tribute. For centuries it worked, until the day the empire itself became a ghost, leaving behind the people it had reshaped. The ruins are still there, in the palaces where Christian hymns once echoed beneath Arabic verses, in the churches turned to mosques and back again, in the names that bridge both worlds. Maria turned Maryam, Anna turned Aisha, Eleni turned Elif. And if you stand long enough before the stones of Topkapı at dusk, when the sun strikes the marble and the air smells faintly of the sea, you can almost hear it, the murmur of 1,000 forgotten women, half in prayer, half in silence. The empire may be gone, but their echoes are not. Which of their stories unsettles you most? The queen who rose by erasing her faith, the village girl who died clutching it, or the millions who lived and died somewhere in between? Tell me below. The comment box is small, but history breathes through conversation. And if this journey through the empire's quietest corridors held you, subscribe. There are still darker corners waiting, where power and faith meet, and the cost of belief is written not in scripture but in flesh.